Hello, my name is Marysia and I'm a tutor for Dublin Dún Laoghaire Education and Training Board Adult Education Service. Today I'm going to talk about and demonstrate the technique of tie and dye. Tie and dye is a method of creating pattern on fabric and clothing. It is an ancient method which is still popular today and was very fashionable in the 60s, the 70s and the 90s. Today I'm going to demonstrate and show you a simple method of tie dyeing using one colour, and then looking at possibilities of using two or more colours. For this project you will need a t-shirt, 100% cotton, a jersey type, or maybe an item of clothing, once again it has to be cotton, that you would like to revamp. Some ideas might be, here is a t-shirt that I'm going to work on that belongs to a member of the family, and you would know what the material is by looking at the label. Okay, usually the labels are inside and tell you what material it has been used. Here is one where I can definitely find what the fabric is, and if you look inside you would find it on the label. Okay, so you look on the label here. Okay, you might also have something you might have made yourself. Here I have something I made a while ago for a member of the family, and be quite nice to use as well. I'm going to look at the materials you will need for the tie and dye. So if I just read them, and at the very end those should be listed. First of all, you need your t-shirt or an item of clothing that you might want to tie and dye. You might want to just use a t-shirt for the first time around, as you might feel more comfortable with it. Then you'll need a few scraps of 100% cotton fabric, or it could be an old t-shirt or a cotton vest that you have cut up. I have mine here. This is bleached cotton that I'm going to use for my samples, and you would need about 2 or 3 pieces like this. Okay, not very much at all, squares, and that's handy. You need your cold water dye. You can use natural dyes, and that's something we can talk about at another time, but we're going to use cold water dyes. It's better to buy it in a pouch. Okay, you can buy it in these tubs that you put in the washing machine, but I feel it's easier if you actually do the dyeing by hand. You have more control. But if you can't get the pouch, you can certainly buy one of these containers. They're about €9 depending where you buy them from, and you can take the lid off and you can use it as you would with a pouch, except the water would be a little bit hotter. Okay, the next item you need are some rubber bands. We're going to tie with rubber bands. Traditionally rubber bands wouldn't have been used, it would have been string, but rubber bands are so much easier to work with. The loom bands are good as well, but have different sizes, some bigger bands and some smaller. A pair of scissors, some salt and vinegar, and that is used for fixing the colour. You will find that because you're hand dyeing it, every wash a little bit of dye will be released, so anything that you dye by hand you will need to wash by hand. It'd be easier. Then you'll need about 3 jam jars, and that'll be for your little samples and also for the ink that you'll mix. The plastic tubs are very good as well. Yogurt containers, yogurt comes in these, quite good to use. So that's the items we need, and I'm going to show you now some of the samples and how we actually make them. So now to show you the samples. This is a circular pattern. Worked in blue dye, and where you see these lines of white is where the elastic bands would go. I have one here where we have 2 circles, and then there are more bands that were applied there. This is very similar to the first one I showed you. And this one is tying diagonally, so it's at a slant and the bands are applied. Next one, which we'll look at later on, is using 2 colours, which can be quite interesting. Now I want to show you what the finished tie-dye would look like. With this one you have the circular shape here and here, and also on the sleeves. And that was in the sample that you could see. Okay. This is in another colour where we have just the 1 circle, and this was first of all made into a t-shirt, which was easier to tie as a single piece of fabric, and then it was sewn up later. And then I have this one to show you. This is the back of the t-shirt, where you can see there's lines. So these lines are running down. They're not diagonal like the sample, but it gives you the idea. So like this, except there's more tie, there's more dye on it and less ties. Okay, so we're going to move on to how we tie the fabric. Now for tying the fabric, elastic bands, I have a range of them here, and I also have some loom bands. They're the very small ones, which were very fashionable a few years ago for children to make bracelets with. Okay, so I have the loom bands, and I have a range of different sizes of elastic bands. Okay, and it's good to have a range. So what I'm going to do is pinch the middle of the fabric, okay, and I'm going to create a circle. But just before I do that, I need to mention any fabric that is new, you need to pre-wash, just a quick wash, because if it is new fabric, you will find that there's a starch in it, which isn't a good thing. It needs to be washed out so that it takes the dye a lot better. So pre-wash any fabric that is new so that it takes the dye better. Okay, so we take the middle, and I'm going to start with a loom band. Okay, and what I do is tie it tight. Okay, tie it really tight. Okay, and you might find with the loom bands they break as you're working with them. Okay, So keep going. The tying method can be a little bit awkward, but you get used to it. You might need to have a little practice first. Okay, so I've got one tie there. So I'm going to use one of these, and this is the way I tend to tie, but you have your own method. Also, what you might want to do is gather some fabric into creases and folds. The more creases and folds you have in the fabric, the more interesting it's going to be as it dyes. Okay, so you might fold over, crease over. Okay, and once again, keep going. Okay, and you can leave spaces like that, that's fine. Move that over. So as you can see, I've made a start. Keep it nice and tight. I've left spaces in between. Where it's tied will remain white. Where it's exposed and no tie, this will take up the dye. Okay, and as I say, make sure it's as tight as you can. Sometimes elastic bands break as you're tying. So the method of tying, up to yourself, but this is the way I do it. Okay, I loop round like that. Okay, and I loop round like that. Hold it like that, twist it round, and twist it round again. So you continue till you have tied it right down to the bottom. Okay, and as I say, you might want to put a little twist in it in the fabric and move the fabric round as well, so it's got creases and folds, because it will make it interesting. And continue all the way down. So what we do is make a loop, come round, make a loop, come round, make a loop, round, and continue right down to the bottom. Okay, right, so continue right down to the bottom, and that's our tie, and make sure they're nice and tight. Okay, I have one here which has been dyed. Okay, and I'm going to open this out. Okay, now if you want to reuse the bands again, you might, well, you will have to untie them, which can take a little while. Or what you might want to do is just cut through them, or sometimes what I do, I try and push this down, but it's probably easier to untie them or take them off. Sorry, to take them off individually, or just cut right through. But when you're cutting, you've got to be careful you don't cut the fabric. So we're going to see what the result is here. Now you will get this little shape like that, and what you'll have to do is iron it out. So we have a tie-dye here. Which has worked quite nicely. And these are all the folds of the fabric where it's white. Okay. Maybe I could have put a little bit more tying in here or folding back, but I think that's interesting. Okay. Now, just to show you the tying process on the t-shirt. Now you can either go for the center if you wish, or you could do as we saw in the blue t-shirt. Okay, where we have one over to one side and one at the other side here. Okay, so they're running that way, so it's not in the center. So that's up to you, okay, how you want to tie. So you can tie in the center, or you can tie like I did. So I'm just going to start off just to show you, okay, and I'm going to go for 2 circles. Now it is important just to put your hand in and just tie the front. You'll get a better tie, and then turn it round, and you might want to tie the back. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a tie here and a tie down here, like on the blue t-shirt. Okay, not in the center. So I begin by putting my hand inside the t-shirt, okay, and what I'm going to do is pinch, okay, where I think I want to start, and remember, just 1 layer of material, so you're only taking the front, do not take the back, okay, that's very important, just 1 layer, and I start tying like I did, okay, making the loop. I have 1 tied, move on to my second, and remember, put folds and creases in, and you can give it a little bit of a twist as well. Okay, move on to the second, use different sizes of bands, okay, and as you're tying, you can, if you want, have the elastics all together, or you might want to separate them a little bit in the ring that you've made. You might want to show a little bit of space in between, okay, where you have a bit of colour, and then you'll have the white parts. So just remember, where the bands are will be the white area, and I continue for the next one. Okay, tying, and arranging and making sure it's tight enough, and just continue. Now I've tied 1 side, okay, and I know it looks very, very awkward, okay, and now I want to start tying at the bottom here, okay, and before I pinch the middle of where I want to start, I want to make sure I'm going to have enough room, okay, so what I'm going to find where I'm going to have the center of it, and once again I just continue, okay, tying, just making loops, okay, and use different sizes of bands, okay, and put a ring together and some spaces as well. Move on to the second, okay, and continue, okay, 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 continue till we meet okay, now it looks awkward. Right, so we have these 2 ties, and you can continue a little bit further, and you might just have, like we had on this blue t-shirt, just the 2 circles. Now you could, if you want, put some circles on the sleeves if you want. Okay, and once again make sure it's a single fabric you are tying. Don't tie the front and the back together, just the front section, or if you want them at the back, just a single layer of fabric you're tying. Okay, so hopefully that is self-explanatory, quite easy to do. I know working on a flat piece is so much easier. That's why it's strongly recommended that you try a little sample out so that you learn how to tie or get used to tying the band, wrapping it. And also it's good to see what happens with the colour. Okay, so keep it simple. Now, having tied your t-shirt, you are ready for the dyeing method. It is a good idea to make sure that you try your small sample because it gives you an idea of what you're doing. But your t-shirt, if you can make sure that you firstly follow the instructions on the packet, okay. To dissolve your dye, do not put your fabric in or your t-shirt in. Dissolve your dye in a bucket. I tend to make sure the water is warmer rather than cold. If you are using the machine washable dyes, I still dissolve that in a bucket. I feel you have more control, and I tend to use warmer water than they suggest on the pack. So dissolve the dye, make sure that you submerge your fabric, use gloves, make sure you use gloves, push your fabric or your t-shirt down to make sure it covers, the dye covers the t-shirt, and follow the instructions. I tend to leave the t-shirt in or anything I dye for about 4, 5, 6 hours. That gives you a deeper colour, and then you have to rinse it anyway, so you're going to lose dye. Okay, so when you've left the fabric or your t-shirt in, what you're going to do is wring it out all by hand, rinse it under the tap, keep rinsing till there's no dye running from the t-shirt. Okay, and then prepare in a bucket your salt and your vinegar. I'll tell you how much you need. And once again, you're going to make sure that your t-shirt is going to submerge in the solution you mix of salt and white vinegar. And the reason for using that is to help fix the dye. Okay, and the quantity you need is 1/2 cup of salt to 8 cups. Okay, so you work in those proportions, and then you're going to add 1 part white vinegar to 4 parts of cold water. So that just gives you an idea of what you need to do. Now, it doesn't matter if you haven't got it quite right with the salt and the vinegar, it's still going to help. And I would leave it there for about 30 minutes. Sometimes I do leave it longer. And after that, no more rinsing, wring it out and let it drip dry on your line. And make sure it dries, okay? Make sure it dries, your t-shirt dries, and then you can take out the bands. Now, I showed you this sample earlier, okay? And actually here I had 2 colours, okay? And this was done in the method that you saw, okay? Like that, like that, and then we got some bands in. Sorry, this is a bit awkward to show you. around the middle here. Sorry, I should show you a small sample. I will do next time. So 2 colours here. I had orange, and then I went for a deeper red. Okay, I could have left it in longer. And what I would do is always make sure your light colours you dye first if you're using 2 colours. Be very careful if you're using orange and green. They can look a little bit muddy. As I say, doing little samples helps you with colours, and it's always best to dye on a white or a creamy t-shirt or light pink, something light. If you dye with 1 colour, okay, what you would do is take it out. Okay, so let's say this is dyed in 1 colour. I've taken the elastic bands out, and then what I would do is I would tie where I want the blue, and I make sure I tie most of the whites. So I tie most of the whites and I tie some of the blue, and then anything exposed, okay, anything exposed, so that's 1 colour there, will dye your 2nd colour. Okay, so here I was going to go for a dark blue, so I'd have red and dark blue. Okay, I'm just going to run over the materials that you require for the tie-dye. So once again, your cotton fabric for your samples, your t-shirt or an item of clothing. Remember, it's got to be cotton. Your cold water dye. If you're getting machine washable, because you can't get the cold water dye, don't wash it in the machine. Work by hand. Your rubber gloves, very important. Your protective clothing or an apron to wear. Your plastic covering for your table. You can use a black bin bag which you could cover, that's very important. Your rubber bands and loom bands if you can. Your scissors, sorry I can't keep this too straight. Your scissors, your salt, your vinegar, you mix them separately and then mix them together. Your 2 buckets, and then your 2 to 3 jam jars for your samples that you're going to dye. And then you might want to have a plastic container. 1 or 2 would be great, like the yogurt containers I mentioned. Okay, right, one just last thing I might mention, that you can add, when you finish your tie-dye, it's possible to add little sequins like that. Now obviously for a boy it won't be appropriate, but for a girl maybe you might decide to put a few sequins in. Okay, if I just lift this one up, what you might want to do is maybe just space a few round. Okay, or you can add a little bit of netting if you wanted. If you're creative, it's amazing what you can add. You could also add a little bit of stitching, that's possible as well. Okay, and if I can just say thank you very much for listening and for your patience. This was the small sample I was going to show you. You could actually include some stitching in your work. Okay, right, and if I can just remind you to please stay safe, wash your hands, observe the social distancing and the government guidelines for COVID-19. Take care, and God bless, and I hope that the tie-dye is useful, but it is a nice family activity to do, okay, or for yourselves. Thank you very much from Marysia. Bye bye.